One of the most annoying things I find about the modern discourse surrounding old movies is this whole concept of XYZ person doesn't like XYZ film because it has things in it that are no longer acceptable. It might portray XYZ person negatively in their view. It might express social norms that no longer exist and are demonised in the modern society. Therefore, they deem XYZ film entirely problematic because of these elements. And there's lots of factors in play here that lead to this particular scenario. The first and foremost being that the film industry, for example, has only been functioning to any great degree for about 100 years. Now that might sound like a long time, and I suppose it is really, but if you look at it in terms of human life, that's only the life of one person really, that's somebody's lifetime. If somebody was born in 1926, when the silent movies were just starting to become talkies, then they could still be alive today and seen it all. And yet another person who's maybe 30 years old can watch 70% of the movies that this person watched in their life, the 100-year-old person, and then just declare that all the content they ever watched was rubbish and problematic. And while this kind of thing has always gone on through history, in that the past has always been rewritten by those in the present, the difference now is that we're putting stuff on film. There's much better record keeping of the past, which makes rewriting of the past by the current a lot harder. So in the past, a critic or a historian or an intellectual or an academic, whatever you want to call them, might have just written something out of history that they didn't like and pretended it never existed. But now we have everything on film, and it's much harder for them to do that. So the new way of doing that is just to declare something problematic and attempt to erase it by social peer pressure. It still exists, people can still watch it, but there's lots of peer pressure not to show it, as it were. Or if it is to be shown, then parts of it have to be bleeped out or deleted or written over, or you know, whatever the fad of the day for dealing with these elements are. But I personally find all this kind of technique of dealing with old films is just to complain about them and then put them on the naughty list is really quite ludicrous, really. I've been watching old media ever since I was a child, and I would sit down in the early 1980s and watch television programmes that were produced in the 1930s. There were elements in there that, you know, they didn't match the world that I was living in now, and they were quite clearly dated. But even as a child, I was quite aware that I was watching something old. I wasn't watching something current. I was watching something that had an element of history about it as well as entertainment. I wasn't basing my opinion on whether I liked the show on the extent to which it matched today's moralistic outview of everything. I was watching the programme based on how well it managed to keep me entertained. And very often it's the programming that spends too much time trying not to be showing images of things that are problematic in the current age that tend to fall into the not very entertaining category, because they're so busy being moralistic that they forget that they need to entertain the audience. And it's not that a product has to have offensive things to the modern sense of morality in it in order to be entertaining. It's just that the people who made them weren't thinking about other things other than entertaining, and they were just going by the morals of their day, but not thinking about the morals so much as making a product that's entertaining. And again, this isn't really a specifically political issue, because you'll find extremes on from all political fronts, where you'll find people that have agendas that they watch entertainment with, and if it fails to meet their specific agenda in some degree, then they'll just pan the whole product regardless of its entertainment value. The most recent example of this that I've watched, there's been a documentary on the BBC, about 3 episodes, not very many episodes, about an hour long per episode, where this historian goes through the gory details of British imperialism. In each episode he focuses on one particular grisly story of some nastiness that occurred in the Empire in days gone by. And it was a very well made and very entertaining series of documentaries. I hardly recommend anyone to watch them, and you'll get through it and time will zoom by and you'll be fascinated by all the details that are brought up. But some people are offended that the BBC is producing programming that has a negative view of the British Empire. They view it as a campaign against the British, as it were. And I mean, that's just nonsense, really. If history happened, it happened. There's plenty of documentaries that people can watch instead of that. They don't have to watch that one. And if they don't want to know the gory details, they don't have to know the gory details. But the gory details happened, and just because somebody's telling you that they happened, there's no reason to shoot the messenger. That's just as much entertaining history as any other history. Usually the most boring documentaries or historical products are the ones that are overly positive about what happened in the past. The full flag waving, trumpeting, effectively sort of just recruitment adverts for whatever it is, they're just sort of sickeningly bland, really. But yeah, without even watching the series or being interested in the subject matter, some people will just use that as an excuse to bash the BBC for using taxpayer money to produce programming that is negative towards the British taxpayer, as it were. And, does it follow on to wider trends and blah, blah, blah. And that's just from one political perspective. But it goes both ways. Like I've just done my obligatory ranking of all the Bond films. And some of those Bond films were made before I was born. And some of them have been made very recently. And throughout that entire series, there's all kinds of what some people in some quarters would call problematic content. Treatment of women, and the fact that Bond's a big old misogynist, and who's the good guys and who's the bad guys. In what circumstances is Mr. Bond allowed to engage in unwanted touching? The list goes on and on. And the movie I put at number 1 was Live and Let Die, which some people think is, bordering on the racist, of course, because it just happens to have a lot of black people in it. And of course, the poor old black people, they can't win at all, anything that a black person appeared in between 1920 and, I don't know, the year 1990 or something, it's all deemed out of date and not representative of whatever it is that black people want to be represented as today in this day and age. And then in the past, of course, there's not enough black people in movies, and nowadays people are complaining there's too many black people in movies, and even though nothing's really changed, and it's about the same as it ever was, really. And what everybody who gets involved in this kind of debate always forgets, handily, is the phrase that the past is a foreign country, because we as a society are constantly changing our morals from a day-to-day basis based on whatever short-term gain people are trying to make on the day. The past occurs almost every 20 or so years. Everything past that date is now so dated, it's not at all representative of how we live today, but that's the whole point. That's the whole point. When you watch an old movie, you don't watch thinking, I'm going to watch something that represents what's going on in the world today. When you watch an old movie, you're doing so because you want to watch an old movie and see how things were in the past. You're looking for that slice of history which makes the film more interesting by dint of it just being older, and you bring in the elements of nostalgia and thoughtfulness, and it gives an extra dimension to a film that might have actually been quite boring when it was made. But now that time has passed, it can be viewed with new eyes, and people can get more out of it in a different way because they're watching for different reasons. And the most irritating thing is the insulting aspect. Anybody who makes their business to purvey in the concept of forcing the moniker of toxic onto a product, from whichever political point of view, is that I find all of them incredibly insulting. Because it insults the intelligence of the viewer to not... It's saying that the viewer doesn't understand that they're watching something old, and that their brain can't compute that they're watching something old. And that just because it's old, they're going to go out and act like what that film represents, because they're so gullible and easily influenced that all it takes is one old movie and they suddenly turn into somebody who existed 50 years ago instead of somebody who exists in today's morality. And I could pick up any old film. I really could. I could pick any old film off the shelf and go through it and find aspects that are problematic. But I would not want any of it edited out ever. I would feel thoroughly insulted if I was watching an old movie and then all of a sudden at some point a bit's just been edited out because somebody believes that my brain couldn't cope with this bit of information that is now deemed toxic, and my brain couldn't process the fact that it was just an old thing that happened in the past and it wasn't an expectation of how I should be in the future. I don't need people to patronise me with a sense of their morality while I'm busy engaging in the nostalgia and the pleasure of watching something from the past and escaping into the past for a brief bit of escapism from whatever the realities of the day are. No, I do not want Bruce Willis's swear words cut out of Die Hard or replaced with nonsense words. No, I do not want Gone with the Wind consigned to the rubbish bin of history just because it happens to have a black lady in it that is performing a role that isn't commensurate with how a black lady's role is in the present day. Just as I don't want my science fiction film to be updated with better graphics of the aliens just because they can. I would like to watch whatever the original release was, to re-engage with the reality of what the film was when it was first released. And the problem with making a video like this is I could list hundreds of films that I don't want touched by nutters. I don't want them finding out about them, you see. If I said, for example, XYZ film had XYZ content in it, and I don't think anybody should ever be messing with that content, you absolutely know that as soon as I've said the title of the film, somebody will be rushing to find out exactly what I'm talking about and immediately deleting it from history as best they can. Because these people, they like the power, don't they? And if you try and argue with them, you just know that's essentially baiting them. But I'll give one example just as a fun little example. I was watching a video recently. It was an American YouTuber, and they were saying how, and they do films, they cover films on their channel, and they were saying that up to a certain point in America, they weren't allowed to show bums, and that there was this film in the 70s where somebody showed their bum and it was a big moment and it was very exciting and they all got very excited about it. It was like a turning point in cinema at the time, because between about 1935 or whatever it was and 1975. Hollywood was so sanitised. It became a bit boring. That's why American films can be quite repetitive and samey from between these years. It's because they were so restricted in what they could do. And of course, you'll see behind me there, I've got a a box set of Carry On films. And the Carry On films are British comedies made between about 1959 and 1975, something like that. And one of the early ones, black and white, probably about 1962, something like that, maybe 1960, 66, somewhere in that era. You got three blokes running around in the nude. You don't see any penises, because, yeah, in the UK, penises are what the Americans thought about bums. So in America, you're not allowed even bums. Here, you were allowed bums. So we got three blokes showing their bums off. And this is a PG film. This isn't an adult film. This is a family entertainment film. You know, this is bring your kids along film, you know. And in Germany, of course, they allow the penises. You know, that's all fine. So you know the cultural differences there. And so when the Americans get all excited about a bum, for an English person, it's like, you're getting excited about a bum? Really? And yeah, I wouldn't want somebody from, I don't know, 1970 in Hollywood telling us that we've got not allowed to show this family-friendly PG film because it's got some blokes' bums in it. And you can extrapolate that to anything, really. Whenever you watch a film or any kind of media product, you've got to have some element of open mind about it, at least with historical things. By all means, we have to, when we create new media, we have to obey by whatever rules are given for the day when they're made. And you know, I'm not going to go out of my way to break rules just to make a YouTube video. I'm going to try and stick to whatever rules there are in this day and age. But maybe in the future somebody will say, he said bum, demonetise, cancel, delete, mark as age restricted. I don't know. But at the moment I can say bum, so I'm saying bum. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention the title of that film in case you're intrigued by this family-friendly comedy that has some bums in it. It was called Carry On Constable, ironically enough. A carry-on film about a group of recruits who join the police force and learn how to be policemen. And like with the James Bond films, in the early days, Mr. Sean Connery playing Bond was always a bit handsy with the ladies. I wouldn't want any of my future versions of James Bond films that I ever watched to have those scenes deleted or edited or come with warning signs or any of that bullshit, because I'm fully aware that in the current day and age we don't like it when people get handsy with the ladies. But if I watch a film from 1962 and I see somebody get mildly handsy with a lady, I'm not gonna be like rushing out to get handsy with ladies because I've watched a film. It's insulting to the intelligence to have that mindset that that's what that is going to happen as a result of that. And the irony is the offence that supposedly these minor scenes in films from the past cause some kind of offence to somebody. The offence is when somebody meddles with the original product for their own individual morality at the expense of everybody else on the planet. That's offensive. That's insulting.